Someone asked that this be recorded, and so now it is recording. So this idea that we are accountable one another for doing the work. In Unitarian Universalism, living our principles is called our spiritual work. So living our shared values is our spiritual work. Does that make sense? As Joe Dispenza likes to say, are you with me? All right. So what I want to do a little bit today is help us deal with what this is all about. They call these values inseparable from one another. If you do any of them, you're going to be doing some or all of the others, right? Interdependence. They're starting with honoring the interdependent web of all existence. We covenant to cherish the earth and all beings by creating and nurturing relationships. You know, we're accustomed in our culture to minimize our relationships, to keep them at a distance, except for one or two that are important. But more and more throughout the world, we're seeing we can't afford to do that. More and more, we're beginning to understand that every interaction with every form of being needs to be explored and discovered and developed more fully as a relationship. Pluralism. We celebrate that we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology. We covenant to learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. To learn from one another. This requires a certain amount of curiosity, listening more than speaking. And that's hard to do. Again, in our culture, we're encouraged to step up and speak out rather than to listen and wait for the moment where the words that spirit inside us, our intuitive self, our deeper self is saying, now, say these words now. Yes. So pluralism requires a sense of curiosity, as does acceptance of any kind. The third value is justice. We work to be diverse, multicultural, beloved communities where all thrive. Now, this term beloved community was developed by Martin Luther King's professor's professor. And Martin Luther King Jr. studied this idea and adopted this idea, a beloved community, and used it as part of building the solidarity that would allow the civil rights movement to be successful. And what is beloved community? You know, I had not encountered it really for a very long time. Prior to, I wasn't even aware of it during the civil rights movement. I first encountered it in a movie called The Preacher's Wife, which was a remake of The Bishop's Wife, set in the inner city of some town in Georgia that looked a lot like Atlanta, except there was snow. And in that, Denzel Washington is the angel that Cary Grant plays in The Bishop's Wife. And I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but one of those wonderful, beautiful actresses replaced Loretta Young. And Gregory Hines is the villain. It's a marvelous story. Anyway, in that, the preacher gets up in his very small, not much bigger than us, congregation that is not able to support itself in its own church. And he says, beloveds. And he meant it. He was loving and feeling loved by everybody in that congregation. So I went and checked it out. And it is, in fact, a concept that has been expanding. And some of you may be aware that James Twyman was developing a spiritual movement that he called Beloved Community. And a number of people were hoping to create nonprofits, spiritual nonprofits, religious nonprofits around that, and in the 90s and early 2000s. And most of those have dissolved since. But the beloved community is not a goal or destination, and it was not any kind of idealistic Christian utopian dream, but instead a way of being, spiritually, politically, economically, emotionally, intellectually. Beloved community is an attitude, an orientation of the heart. It's a disciplined understanding of our own relationship to other people, to everyone else on the planet, to every living thing. So it's not enough to recognize we are interdependent. We're taking it the next level and realizing that all beings are beloved, and we are beloved by all beings, and we are the means by which all beings know they are beloved. It requires love, agape. Of all the legacies that Dr. King bequeathed to us, including legislation, including the Voting Rights Act, including the dismantling of legal segregation, including so many tangible advances, the construct of beloved community may prove in time, over the long arc of time, to be the most radical, durable, and transformative. And that's from Reverend Victoria Safford. So we're looking at ultimately creating heaven on earth, which is what the book of Revelation is saying. It's also what the Lord's Prayer says, the prayer that Jesus taught his disciples. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, which, by the way, is part of a shorthand from a Jewish prayer that every male in the Jewish community was required to say at least 3, preferably 5 times a day. So the Islamic practice of 5 times a day was present before Quran and before Muhammad. So 3 to 5 times a day, this very long prayer, which is summarized in the prayer that we say Jesus taught in the New Testament, it includes the notion that the qualities of the divine be present on earth. And at the end of the New Testament, in the book of Revelation, John tells us that in his vision, the old earth and the old heaven pass away, and a new heaven and earth, one, are formed. And that's the direction that this idea of beloved community takes us. Then transformation, we adapt to the changing world. We covenant to collectively transform and grow spiritually and ethically. Openness to change is fundamental to our Unitarian Universalist heritage. Yes, it is so easy to think, well, we always did it that way, and I don't want to continue to do it that way, whatever that way was. It's easy to get into a comfort level. But the earth is telling us right now, we don't get to do that. The earth is requiring us, our dear mother, the earth, is requiring us to not rest in old comforts, but to allow and to adapt to shifting contexts and shifting ways of being, as most of us in Oregon experienced this last week. Indeed. The next value is generosity. We cultivate a spirit of gratitude and hope. Isn't that interesting? Generosity comes out of gratitude. Now, in the other traditions that I also work with, gratitude is the beginning to open the heart to the power and process and presence that is everywhere. Gratitude is the means by which we can easily give. Gratitude is the means by which we are aware of how much we are receiving. And one of the things that I've been tracking for a little while is how the world shifted and the American economy shifted when people stopped expressing gratitude for the food on their table. We stopped saying grace as a culture, and grace is derived from the same root as gratitude. And when we stopped saying thank you for all these good things, day after day, meal after meal, we got out of the habit of being in gratitude, and we got out of the habit of being generous. And so we all have storage lockers, not everyone in this group, but in this culture, we go out and we spend extra money to have storage lockers to contain the things that are too much for the house we live in, because we continue to hold on to things. And for the last week or so, I've been helping a 70-something who is no longer able to live in the home that she's been living in. And it took me literally 2 full days just to empty out the closets, because every newspaper that was any value, every photograph that she'd ever had, every blanket she had ever received, every piece of needlework she'd ever made or done is still in her home. It never occurred to her to share those with other people, because she had not been raised in gratitude. She had not ever felt gratitude toward anyone out there. She always resented how they were treating her, rather than being grateful for what she was receiving. And our culture trained her to do that. The TV reinforces it. If you're not watching Christian TV, you're not getting this. Or Hallmark. You can watch it on Hallmark. So generosity, we cultivate a spirit of gratitude and hope. And this is the other thing that our culture does not want us to have. Our culture wants us to be fearful and in despair, because then we'll go out and buy more. We'll try to heal it by acquiring more. And so the Unitarian Universalist movement is once more counterculture, as it has been virtually its whole existence. And we're insisting on being hopeful. Now, some of you know that my previous career, and to some extent ongoing activity, is as a futurist. And I have to tell you, I am often accused of being a hopeful idealist. How dare I? But I have to tell you, the trends that I see inspire hope. There is much in this world that is very hopeful and hope inspiring. And you just have to get off the beaten track of the mainstream media to discover them, and have the intention of discovering what are the ideas that are emerging, what are the technologies that are emerging, what are the understandings that are emerging. They're out there and they're available to us. We covenant under generosity to freely and compassionately share our faith, our presence, and our resources. Our generosity connects us to one another in relationships of interdependence and mutuality. In the history of economy, I come into this work from anthropology, and if we look at the prehistory of economic structures, what we see is gift exchange economies. The offer and needs process that you guys are instituting here is part of a gift exchange economy. And people who have done and looked at the history of economic structures over the years found that money only existed as a medium of exchange with someone who was not part of the gift exchange system of the local community. Someone comes to visit, they're taking something with them. They don't have something to offer because they're just on their way through, so they leave something of value. That could be a ruby, it could be coins, it could be whatever. Okay. Now the coins were all minted in the temples, because once temples were established, after the urbanization, the civilization, the citification of humanity, once temples were established, the rule was you could only bring what was of value in the temple to the temple to be offered. So there were money changers out in the courts around the temple, so that if I came from Africa into Jerusalem, I could bring my African whatever, and I could exchange that for the temple's coinage that then I could offer to the temple. All right. And the same was true if it was the temple of Diana or the temple of Jupiter. It didn't matter. It was all those temples. So coinage was invented for strangers. And it became the medium of exchange in more and more urban environments, because people were no longer producing, no longer experiencing what, or able to exchange what they produced. So the next thing that we have after the cash-based economy, very, very inefficient, is what has emerged in the last 10 years, and that's the debt-based economy. We owe each other with interest, which is even less efficient. So if we can get back to the generosity of saying, I have this, here, take it. I know somewhere along the line what I need will come to me. That's where we're going. The next value is equity. We declare that every person has the right to flourish with inherent dignity and worthiness. Isn't that beautiful? Yeah. So these are the values that they're looking at replacing the set of purpose or principles that we've been living with for the last 40 years, 50, 60 years, really, 65 to 2022, and the seventh one in 85. So we're looking at that. But the fundamental thing we need to be aware of is that this is all based on the idea that we don't need to think alike to love alike. And that loving is based on the notion of acceptance. Believe it or not, until I can accept you, I can't respect you, and I can't appreciate you. And accepting, respecting, and appreciating are the essence of loving. Yes? And when we add compassionate caring to that, then we are making sure that everyone is feeling beloved in our beloved community. So the four letters are C-A-R-A, compassionate caring, acceptance, respect, and appreciation, which is cara, C-A-R-A, which is the Latin word for the heart. So it's easy to remember, cara. We are about cara. And in that wonderful epistle, 1 Corinthians 13, where Paul is describing all the qualities of love, the word he's actually using is caritas, heart beingness. So this is where Unitarian Universalism is going. We were a very heady. We were intellectual, and we were very involved in what the principles were. And we're being invited to make that very long journey back down into the heart, and to bring all of that understanding, all of that wisdom, all of that knowledge, all of that truth and meaning that we have been searching for, and operate from here, from the heart. Yes. And this is what makes Scoof fabulous. And I'm seeing the whole association move in this direction. And I wish you well on the journey, and I'm happy to be supportive in any way I can. And it's been a delight to be with you, and I look forward to more. Thank you so very much. And I'm stopping the recording now. Thank you.